Hello, everybody, and happy 2023. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome, coming to you over here with another video on That's Comical. And of course, if you happen to be watching and it's a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. I am so excited because of the fact that a very good friend of mine who you have seen before has been gracious enough with her busy schedule to return and discuss MCU in 2022. We've got Gabby. She's back. How you doing? Happy New Year.
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I was so looking forward to getting to do this and get to really recap and talk all things MCU because I know my 2022 was very, very busy with graduating college and starting a new job and just sort of like dealing with a lot of life transitions. So I haven't been super active on YouTube, but I have been watching the MCU and I've been keeping up with everything. So I'm excited to dive in and discuss.
Yeah, and it was a very interesting year for me as well because of the fact that I unfortunately was not really able to catch many of these films in theaters because Gabby knows and all of you know and the Four Winds and their cousin twice removed know that my wife and I welcomed our daughter into this world last May. It was strange having to catch up in a certain manner of speaking in regards to all the movies that were coming out in theaters. And I am just very glad that I was actually able to get in my fill of MCU thanks to getting Disney Plus, and I got to watch all the films and I got to watch all the new TV shows, only to culminate in a treat. And that was going back to the theaters to cap off the end of Phase 4 with Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which we, of course, will be talking about today. But before we get into all of the new MCU stuff to concluding Phase 4, let me just say, if you enjoy this video, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. We'd love to talk to you. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you are up to date with all of our latest content. I just had the first That's Comical meeting with my team over here. We had a great hour discussion. We got big plans, everybody. So I hope that you are all ready. So before we get into the new stuff, I actually want to follow up, Gabby, on a discussion from last time we met and discussed MCU. So I actually went out, thanks to some holiday gift cards that I got, I went out and got myself a couple of Spider-Man movies that I was missing in my collection, just because of how much I loved Spider-Man No Way Home, and I know you loved that movie too.
Yeah.
But actually watching the Sam Raimi trilogy and the Mark Webb duology with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, I gotta say that Spider-Man No Way Home really breathed new life into these older films. And as someone who remembers walking out of that movie theater in 2006 with his head down, so upset with Spider-Man 3, just reminding myself that we have to remember that your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is going to be talking to Tom Holland and saying, I once fought an alien made out of black goo once. I'm like, well, now it just makes so much more sense to actually watch this movie and appreciate it for what it is. And it really is a whole new experience knowing now what these older Spider-Man films are going to eventually lead to thanks to the MCU.
Yeah. I think like this is one of the things I said last time, or at least I hope I said it. Like, I think for me, when I think about Spider-Man No Way Home, I think that's arguably like the best film of Phase 4. I think like maybe it could be subjectively, objectively, because I think like what that film did from bringing like taking every, like everything in the Spider-Verse, from like the Tobey Maguire movies to the Andrew Garfield movies and the villain, like bringing everything together. And I think it's even more remarkable when you think about the fact, and I think back to 2019 when I was in my first semester of college and like sitting, waiting to like get into one of my college classes and sitting with some of my friends and being like, oh my gosh, there's not even going to be a third Spider-Man movie because of what was going on with Disney and Sony, and thinking back to like that period of time and when that was happening to now seeing like what the product of all that was, which is this like amazing Spider-Man movie that really just pays homage to all of those movies that have been created, is just like, it's extraordinary. And I haven't gotten a chance to rewatch it at all since it came out in theaters because it's not on Disney Plus, and I haven't gotten a chance to pick up the DVD yet, and I don't know why I haven't. But it like truly, like even just from the one time that I saw it in theaters, it just is that movie. It's so emotional and just has so many high points. Tom Holland is amazing, and it is, I think, the movie from Phase 4. And there were so many high expectations for it, and I think it really was one of those movies that did deliver and pay off in a lot of ways that I feel like maybe some other movie releases didn't, which we can get into for Phase 4, but Yeah.
No, it was a risk that they took. And I gotta say that they just they threw all their cards onto the table and they played their hand right. That's the fact that you just look at the credits and you heard about the fact that all of these esteemed actors were coming back to reprise these roles. I mean, I had only known that Jamie Foxx and Alfred Molina were signed on. And then, of course, when we saw the teaser trailer, we were so excited because we knew Willem Dafoe was coming back. But I wasn't sure if they were actually going to be also getting Thomas Hayden Church and Rhys Ifans back to reprise their roles of Sandman and Lizard. And wouldn't you know, that was a big surprise. And they did it. And I was so happy about that. But of course, they really tried to keep it as hidden as much as possible. Just getting Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield back as well, that just shows you that this was fan service handed to the faithful on a silver platter, and they said, we're just going to give you everything you want. And this big fight that fans of films and even film personas, they basically say, don't give in to the fans because it's never going to be good for you. Well, I don't know. I mean, you take a look at Spider-Man No Way Home, and you now see that one of the most popular up-and-coming franchises in film is the Sonic the Hedgehog films. I mean, it says something. Maybe that's not the wrong way to go.
Yeah. And I think, because the big thing, especially with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield coming back, is there were so many people that were predicting it. It was one of those things, like, when it actually happened in the theater, it was exciting to actually see the payoff for it, especially how they did it. It was just, like, that scene there. I will never forget, like, seeing it in theaters and, like, watching them come out of the portal, just, like, absolutely amazing. And I think it's one of those things, and we can talk about this, too, because I think there's also some fan service a little bit that happened in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where we can get into that later. And I think it's just something, like, exciting about, like, having the anticipation, the build up for, like, will this happen, then actually getting to see it pay off and getting to enjoy it. And I think, like, there's fan service done well, and then there's fan service that feels like it could be done for the sake of fan service. And there's some people who make the argument that Avengers Endgame dipped into that territory a little bit, which, like, you can have different thoughts on that. But I think, like, at the end of the day, this movie did all of those fan service in those moments really well, because it didn't feel like it was there for the sake of just, like, giving it to the fans to give it to the fans. It felt like it was there to pay homage to, all of these Spider-Man movies and to all the villains to actually get to. When you think about, like, what the whole entire plot of the movie is it's sort of writing these villain stories, like, curing them, healing them, like, instead of just letting them, go out the way that they did. It just feels like a nice homage to all of those movies. And so it is fan service, but it doesn't feel like typical fan service. It feels like, oh, we're just going to give you this because you like it. There's thought that's put into it and consideration, which I think, is that really even then fan service? But because obviously fans want it, but you know what I'm saying? I feel like fan service often has more of a negative connotation than a positive one sometimes. And I think, like,
I agree.
That was I feel like it was, again, like, done really, really well. And the fact they were able to keep everything hidden so that you were able to go into the theater and just, like, watch all those moments unfold and really, really enjoy them was really special. And even, like, what they did with Aunt May and her plot line and how that pays homage to the original Spider-Man movies, but also sort of MCU.
Making it its own.
You get what I mean? Yeah. Is it like, it takes, that storyline from the infamous storyline from those Spider-Man movies and sort of makes it, like, the MCU takes it and makes it its own. And again, it's just, if you love Spider-Man, like, that movie is your movie,
Absolutely. So I don't think there's a better way to segue into the first film that came out in 2022. And that, of course, is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, a creation of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, who ironically, of course, are the people who created Spider-Man. Also came out just a couple years after Spider-Man was introduced to us in 1962. It is so incredible to see that we celebrated Spider-Man's 60th anniversary this past year. That's amazing. And in 1963, there were so many more characters. So this year, we're celebrating so many anniversaries of classic Marvel characters, including my personal favorites, the X-Men, who were created in 1963. But not only that, we have Sam Raimi directing this film after all of the rewrites and the bowing out of the original director who directed the first Doctor Strange film. So let me just say that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was the MCU film that I was the most excited 4.
Yeah.
And I was so angry when they announced that this movie was no longer going to be coming out in March of 2022. Rather, it's coming out on May 5th, 2022, which was 2 days before my daughter's due date, which ended up being on May 10th. So I'm like, why? Why do you do this to me? Because that would have been the very last movie that I saw in theaters. You know,
Like,
I
it
would
was
have.
a good movie to see in theaters, I think. Like, because I had the whole experience of when I saw this movie in theaters, not to cut you off.
No,
but
no problem.
Just to say that, like, I agree with you with the release date being pushed back, because I graduated college. My graduation date was like May 14th. So it's like the movie came out the weekend before my final week of college. So I had final projects and everything that I was working on. And it was just like busy. Like, to have this movie come out when it did was like terrible, terrible timing. But
Yeah.
I had a friend that came down and visited me for the weekend so we could come and see the movie together. And her train was delayed. So I had to like pick her up from the like train station once her train came in, and then we like ran to my dorm to drop off her stuff, and then ran to the movie theater and like got our tickets, and then like got into our seats like as I think maybe some of the trailers had already started, or like we were, but it was like a close cut. And I remember just sitting down in the theater being like, okay, I made it. I can see the movie, we can chill. And then like actually getting to watch the movie in theaters, it was a fun experience because I like getting to see it in the city of Chicago. And I think we had the movie theater we went to, we had like 21 plus tickets, so we were like up on a balcony. I don't know, it was just like a cool experience for getting to see a Marvel movie in comparison to what I normally do.
You just reminded me of a very funny story that happened to me. Ironically, if we were talking about this last year, it would have been 20 years ago. It's crazy.
Wow.
But my friends and I were all in college, and we were going to go see Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and we were going to see it in digital. We never saw it in digital before. So we went to the movie theater. We were looking for the tickets, and we were looking for the times. They were like, where are the times? Where are the tickets? They go, oh, that's playing in the theater about 2 miles down from here in the next 15 minutes. So I still remember yelling with my friends, okay, everyone, who wants to break a few traffic laws? So we all ran into our cars and we drove to the other theater, and we got there just in time for the movie to start. So that reminds me of that experience. That was one of my favorite experiences when it came to movies. But so, of course, Sam Raimi, you know, he directed the original Spider-Man trilogy with Tobey Maguire. He is also well known for some of the most cult classic horror films, particularly The Evil Dead. He is the reason why Bruce Campbell is the cult icon that he is, who, of course, also shows up in every movie that he directs, like Stan Lee's used to do in all the MCUs. And wouldn't you know, he does make an appearance in this movie as well. So will definitely say that I had a fun time with this film. It was by no means perfect, but I do feel that if you are a Sam Raimi fan, you will definitely have a little bit more of an appreciation for it than just an average MCU fan or a hardcore MCU fan. It's like, if you have not seen a movie like Evil Dead and not seen things like the camera angles that he uses and the jump scares that he uses, you're just not going to get those little nuggets that make a Sam Raimi film a Sam Raimi film. And one of the biggest weaknesses of this film is the slow points in the movie. But that's just because Sam Raimi doesn't do that. Sam Raimi didn't even do it that great in the Spider-Man films. He is all about fast-paced, in your face, just get these people on a roller coaster ride and don't stop it until I say so. That's just Sam Raimi, and that's how he makes his movies.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think like, because I'd watch some other people like YouTube content creators that I watch review this movie, and I think that's one of the things that they mentioned as well that I very much agree with, is that this movie is like the movie for people who are fans of Sam Raimi, because there's so many Easter eggs and references and things that are very just like reference his style from, like, you know, the cameos that you mentioned and everything else. But I think the movie itself, I like walked out of the theater and was like, that was great and really liked it. And then like as I started to sit with it a little bit more, I was like,
you let it stew.
And I feel like it doesn't hold up maybe over time, because then like as you get out of like the excitement of like, oh my gosh, the movie and the cameos and things that happen in the movie, and even just some of the jump scares and like, you know, the horror drama, and even just Sam Raimi being back as director, and everything and sort of, get away from the initial excitement, it's like, maybe there were some things here that weren't so great. And it just, yeah, I was like, I don't want to say, because I liked the movie when I saw it in theaters. Like I said, I had fun with it, but I think like overall, I was like walking away from it like a few weeks to a month later. I was like, maybe that wasn't what I like, like sitting on it and being like, maybe that doesn't make sense. I don't know if, yeah.
Well, also to a certain degree, I would also say when you get a movie that's called The Multiverse of Madness, I think another one of the biggest weaknesses of the film is that I think a lot of us really expected a lot more.
Yeah, I think that was one of the big downfalls and I think like this is kind of an overall thought that I have for Phase 4, but I think it really applies to this movie specifically, is that I think people's expectations for the MCU have changed so much.
Yeah.
Like in Phase 4, which is why a lot of people maybe, and again, like I know we're going to touch on this, have been disappointed by Phase 4 because it felt like with Phase 1, Phase 2, like early on in Marvel's like the MCU origins, you're just sort of watching movie to movie and you don't really have a significant amount of expectations. Like you kind of knew like, oh, maybe they're building to the Avengers, and then like the Avengers movie happened, the first one, and like that's huge.
That's
and then,
a game changer.
Shows up in the end credit scene, but it's like I don't think anybody was expecting like what Infinity War and Endgame, like for it to be like on that scale, because I think there was no knowing. But now after having gone through the first 3 phases of the MCU and it becoming this big, massive cultural thing where it's almost like how do you not keep up with the MCU, because it's just something that like everyone is aware of culturally, even if you watch the movies or you don't. Like it just exists now, and I think has like changed the superhero movie genre entirely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it pretty much started when Christopher Nolan decided to make those Batman films, but then right around it's don't forget, it was crazy to believe that the year The Dark Knight comes out, and that's like one of the most game-changing Batman films of all time. Iron Man came out just 2 months earlier, and that's when the MCU actually started. So but I think the right way to define everything that you just said, Gabby, is I think a lot of people are a little MCU'd out.
Yes, that was one of the notes that I had as well, is I feel like there's just burnout because like you have the first 3 phases, everything was so great, and now especially like when you look at the release calendar, I know we're talking about the movies first, but it was like Moon Knight came out, and then by the time that show wrapped up, because it obviously releases week to week, then Doctor Strange came out, and then maybe you get a little bit of a break, but then Miss Marvel, it just feels like it's constant MCU content now between the movies and the shows, and you kind of, in order to have to know what's going on, have to sort of watch and pay attention to everything, and so it is just an overload of MCU content, and especially when there is like the expectation of like, what is this going to lead to? What are we building to? And it feels like there's also just a lot happening in Phase 4 that they're building up to, that it's like, where is all of this going, and how do the puzzle pieces connect? Where it felt like maybe with the first 3 phases of Marvel, it was like kind of very clearly like, we're building to Thanos, we're building to Infinity War, like everything was building obviously there were other side problems, but that was the big thing, and it feels like there's lots of big things that they're building towards.
No, I'm totally with you there, but again, you also have to remember, going into it as someone who reads comic books, you have to remember it's like, they're not stopping at Infinity War, because that there is now 80 years worth of stories that you can use for these films. It's just a matter of executing them well. And I also think another one of the biggest issues that Phase 4 had was also because of all the people giving their opinions and blowing up the internet, the MCU, and Kevin Feige is going completely to the left, and all of this BS that I was so upset that this is what every single movie, starting with Black Widow, came with. And I'm just like saying, why can't you just go into the theaters and watch this movie? And if you like it, that's great. If you don't like it, you don't like it.
Yeah.
That's why I have been having so many conversations with so many people. And a lot of people are very much on the same wavelength as I am, because of all of the media exposure that Eternals got. Nobody really sat down and watched that movie for what it was. And I still personally feel it was a very different, very original, very well done film. I will say that till the day I die. I will fight people on that, because you don't get this movie if you don't if you don't want to learn where it's coming from. I'm not saying that you have to do all that research, but it's nice to know, because when you see these movies, you're curious to know, was this true to the comics? Was it not true to the comics? Was it thrown in there for the purposes of fan service? There's the fun thing about comic book films is the source material is so vast and the lore is so deep. If it doesn't entice an average person to just ask someone who's been reading comic books, or God forbid, pick up a comic themselves and learn about it, I don't know what else to say. I mean, if anything, I feel that that's the beauty of these comic book films. They make you want to learn more.
Yeah. And I think, like, going back to one of your original points, because that was a note that I had down as well, is that I feel like YouTube internet theory culture has kind of changed the way that we consume MCU content. And I wrote maybe not for the better, because
I agree.
I think about, like, really where Phase 4 started, not in terms of like the movies, but in terms of like Disney Plus releases. Like the big thing after 2020, everyone was just like desperate and like hungry for content. And when WandaVision came out, that obviously blew up all over the internet, and everyone was so excited about that movie, or that show rather, excuse me. But the big thing is everyone was theorizing about Mephisto and Mephisto this and Mephisto that, and who's Mephisto, and
God.
these things. And so then when you got to the end of the show, and that was a plot line that like never fizzled out, and there was the thing that happened, like the Ralph Boner joke that happened, and there was a lot of people who were expecting that to be an X-Men thing. And so then you have a whole bunch of people who like walk out of a show that was arguably really, really good and played with a genre in a really, really interesting way, like with, you know, referencing all these different sitcoms, and they did stuff in black and white, and then did like, you know, the 80s, like different decades of sitcoms, like something that was just very unique and very different, something the MCU had never done before. And like, you walk away from it almost with this disappointment, because it's like, oh, here's not the big shiny thing that was just like given to me that I was theorizing about and a lot of people were predicting about over these weeks. And like, it can be fun, but I think when your enjoyment of the release becomes based on, you know, the theories that different people have and the expectations of like, I want this to happen, instead of for just enjoying it what it is for what it is, like a lot of these releases, like there is the disappointment and the like, I wish there could have been more, which I feel like, you know, going back to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, is like we're building up to the multiverse slowly, bit by bit, and like this was just another piece of that, rather than like the big explosion of like we're in the multiverse, you know, like we're getting there. But
yeah, especially considering that we now know exactly where this new series of films is going to end, with Marvel's Secret Wars or Avengers Secret Wars. And granted, I don't know if you know that, but just for all of you people out there, there were actually 2 events that Marvel made called Secret Wars. One that has nothing to do with what the current film series of Secret Wars is going to turn into, and one that is based on that specific Secret Wars. So we're going to be getting Secret Wars from the 2015 comic books, which is all about the multiverse, and that's, who knows if they're going to be entirely close to it, because the main antagonist in that series of stories is Doctor Doom. So that's one thing that I would love to see one day. But I agree with you on the whole thing with Mephisto. I mean, I'm sure we're going to see Mephisto, especially considering 2 specific things that we got thanks to the MCU shows. But I just want to ask you a double question here. So I want to know what your attitude was on the introductions of America Chavez. And the other question that I had for you is, now that we have this film, even though Kevin Feige said you do not need to watch the shows to understand what's going on in the MCU, I think that's a lie, and that you actually do have to watch WandaVision.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think that was almost like one of my issues with this movie, is like when I sat down and like thought about it, I was like, I feel like looking at the plot of WandaVision, it's like WandaVision happens and that series ends with her sort of being horrified, like realizing what she did, all those townspeople like flying away. She goes into the cabin, she starts reading the Darkhold, and obviously she's like looking and searching for her children. And so I guess the assumption is like she becomes corrupted by the Darkhold, wants her children. And so that's how sort of how we get to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. But it's like, if you haven't watched WandaVision and you don't know that,
yeah, because all you really needed to do was just remove the line where she goes, "We're not talking about Westview." If you would have just removed that one line entirely, you never really would have had to watch WandaVision. But because they mentioned Westview when Stephen Strange is talking to Wanda for the first time, and then he sees what she has become, if it wasn't for that one line, you didn't need to do that. I'm going to reference something that we discussed last time. Like, you could have easily watched Black Widow right after Captain America Civil War if it wasn't for that post-credit scene.
Yeah, exactly. And so it feels like because that's one of the things is like, I feel like, again, where the MCU burnout is happening is because like, it feels like you need to watch the shows and the movies and you need to pay attention to everything because it's all going to sort of build in. And even like, if we jump to, not to get too far ahead, but like looking at the Miss Marvel show, like in the one of the end credit scenes that happens there that sets up the Marvels, like I just have a feeling that like when that comes out this year, you're gonna be like, what, okay, how are we, like, I don't know, I just have a feeling like you need to have watched Miss Marvel because that sets up that
you
movie.
you would have had to have seen Ms. Marvel in order to actually be introduced to Kamala Khan, and you would have also had to have seen WandaVision, or you would have no idea who Photon, aka Monica Rambeau, is.
Yes, that as well. So it just feels like you need all of that content, and that's where it's like, it's great that Marvel has that now because it's more ways of introducing characters and introducing stories. And for like example, like a show like Moon Knight, like that's great that you have like, you know, the time and the ability to build that character and get to do things like that. But it's almost like, again, it is just like the burnout of having to keep up with everything. And if you don't watch the shows, like there maybe it's almost unfortunate now that it's like you can't, you like there's going to be pieces I think of the movie that you're going to be missing, because even like I think there is a scene in Multiverse of Madness where they have WandaVision on one of the,
I think you're right about that.
I think like that's when she is about to take out Professor X. But yeah, when I think it's in the scene, maybe when that moment happens and she's like in that whole but I feel like, again, like there is, at least to me, multiple nods to WandaVision. And even like, where did her children come from? Because there's several scenes with, you know, like there's things where if you haven't watched that, even What If, like having watched that was super helpful for understanding for what they do with some of the like different variations of Doctor Strange that we see.
Well, which is one of the best episodes in that whole series. That's a great episode.
So good. And so it's like, it feels like you need, so like, to answer that question, I feel like you need all of it, which is almost, I feel like what maybe some of the burnout and the frustration with Phase 4 is that there's just a lot to keep up with.
And the same thing can be said about America Chavez, because I think that the actress was really done dirty by the fans. There were so many fans and non-fans that were basically criticizing her for some of the most asinine reasons whatsoever. I mean, like, it makes me sick sometimes, but again, I also think that she was also one of the weakest points of the movie because we really needed more. I mean, I understand why she was there. I know that she is. I honestly have no idea how popular she is as a character in the comics, because I haven't read anything with her in it. I haven't heard about her from many people who read comics. So I don't know much about America Chavez, but I know that what they did bring to the film is accurate. And once again, I understand why she's there, but I really feel that I don't know if this is the right choice of words. So if it is, I'm okay with that. If it's not, but like, she's sort of like the MacGuffin in this whole story. Like, you know, she's the reason why Wanda's after her and she's not really doing much and blah, blah, blah. So I'm just like, why is she here? It's just like they're doing this character wrong. They're like setting up for like a Young Avengers movie. Like, what are they doing here?
Right. I really liked Xochitl Gomez as America Chavez. Like,
I thought she was great, though. I thought she as an actress were good. I liked her.
And I think like I kind of sat and I had this light bulb moment where I was like, because it feels like so many of our new characters are either getting introduced like through their own show, or they show up in a movie and then they're getting their own show. Like you could say with Riri Williams and Black Panther, you know, like we know the Ironheart show is coming, and so it's like she ends up in the movie and then have a show. Well, we don't really know what else they're doing with America Chavez beyond this movie. Obviously, we see like where her character ends by the end of this movie, but it's like there's no really future, like we don't really know where she's showing up again and sort of what they're doing. So it is sort of odd that she is just in this one movie and is sort of like, you know, like again, like the whole central plot kind of revolves around her character and sort of like Wanda wanting her because of her ability to sort of multiverse jump and different things. And so she kind of, like you said, I feel like is a little bit of a MacGuffin, and so it maybe isn't the best way to bring her character to life, because it's like her plot is essentially she can jump through multiverses and travel through multiverses she lost her parents and that whole thing happened with her moms and the bee.
Yeah.
And then, she's not able to control her powers. And ultimately, like, she's almost a vehicle for Doctor Strange too. Like, a lot of his character development happens through her.
Yeah, pretty much.
Realizing, like, he needs to trust her and just let her do, like, instead of, so it's kind of like she's there because they needed to introduce her for whatever it is they have planned down the line. But there really isn't, like, when you actually step back and, like, look at, like, what's the story that they tell, it's, like, not much. And so,
and that,
like, yeah.
And that's just going to lead into the real elephant in the room. The scene where Doctor Strange meets the Illuminati. This was like, everybody is guessing who is going to be here, what's going to happen. And, you're having like a massive fan meltdown with what you're watching, because it's not the fact that you're seeing certain characters. It's the fact that you have seen these characters played by some of these actors and actresses before. So, like, first seeing Chiwetel Ejiofor come back, that was good to see him back, because there definitely is a story brewing based on the post-credit scene for the first Doctor Strange film. But then you see the actor who played Black Bolt in the Inhumans again, and this time he actually looks like Black Bolt because he's wearing the mask. You see Lashana Lynch show up again as Captain Marvel, which is really, really great. But, of course, the big two things that you get are, you get John Krasinski playing Mr. Fantastic. So that's like the greatest thing ever. And let me just say, my wife almost died when she saw him on screen with that uniform on, because she loves The Office and she loves John Krasinski. But of course, getting Professor Xavier, getting Patrick Stewart back, and not just that, but just seeing him in the way that we know him as, and then hearing the 1992 X-Men cartoon theme in the background, that's great. And then nothing happens.
Yeah, it kind of is, like, again, that is a moment where, like, we're talking about, like, if you want to talk about the fan, like, to now to actually be able to say it, because we've gotten to this point in the conversation, like, talking about the fan service in Spider-Man, which feels very intentional and very purposeful, and it's like there's a meaning there and there's things that they're doing, and it's like elevates the plot, and it's like this feels like it happened, so it's like, let's have some character cameos, and it's like they're there for 5 minutes and then Wanda just like takes them all out like that, and it's like okay. And the thing is, I was sitting like with my friend and we went and got dinner after we saw the movie, and we were having a conversation, and this wasn't something that I really thought about as the movie was happening, because obviously I was just paying attention to the plot and like, where is the story going and everything, and I wasn't really processing everything that I had taken in yet. But like, as we were sitting down and having a conversation, I was almost like, was this like actually meaningful? Like, is this actually as big as we thought it was, or is it just like fan service for the sake of fan service? Because like, thinking about, again, like having to watch other MCU properties, for like, one, Captain Carter shows up is in the Illuminati as well.
I am so sorry, I forgot about Haley Atwell coming back.
Shows up, and I wanted to briefly add
tying in the What If show.
Yeah, so it's like, again, you need to have watched What If to sort of see that and understand that. And then like, the other thing is with like the Loki series, you get introduced to the idea of variants. And so it's like, in the Loki series, there's obviously like a handful of the variants that look like Loki, and then there's some that don't. They're like some of the extras in that scene. And then you have, like, again, going back to Spider-Man No Way Home, it's like, could you say that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield are variants of Spider-Man, but they obviously look different because they're different actors? So it's like, how is the MCU handling that? Like, what is the goal? Because I feel like we haven't really entirely figured it out, because it feels like every movie is kind of doing their own thing in terms of variants of different characters and everything. Because like, the reason why I bring this up is because John Krasinski as Reed Richards was like a huge, that was big. Like, everyone in the movie is freaking out. That's like the big golden plate. But I sat with my friend and we were talking about it, and we're like, is that like, because I feel like the initial assumption, like, when you're watching this movie is like, oh my God, John Krasinski has been cast as Reed Richards, like, Fantastic Four movie is happening. That's your initial reaction. And then like, you sit back, I sat back for a moment and I was saying to my friend, and I don't know if she brought it up first or I brought it up, or like, we just kind of had the realization together as we were talking, or it's like, he could have just made that cameo because a lot of people wanted to see that. Obviously, it was a big discussion on Twitter for the fan service. And then when the Fantastic Four movie comes out, they cast somebody different, and then just like John Krasinski just happens to be a variant of Reed Richards, but not the Reed Richards that we see in Fantastic Four if he decides he doesn't want to commit. So it is an interesting situation in that way, is that you don't really know if that was something that was set up just for fans, like a fun little cameo, or if that was actually like a casting announcement, and now like that's a whole, like we still don't know. And I find that to be like interesting that Marvel has put themselves in that position where they can kind of do that now, where it's like you can have so many different variants of different characters, and so you don't really know. I don't like, I just kind of walked out of it and I was like, this doesn't feel as like as impactful as it was maybe when you first saw it in theaters, because again, like you're excited about it when you see it, but then like you sit back for a moment, you process and you think, and you're like, maybe that's not as great.
Look, Benedict Cumberbatch is great as the character. I'm so glad that he's there and he's done his job, but I agree with you, because it's like when the movie's over, your head is spinning, because especially that third act, which is a crazy ride. And it's like it goes from MCU film to flat out in your face horror with that last couple of scenes. But the movie's over and then you're like, where are we going? Especially that post-credit scene. Because I have a question for you. I mean, you obviously figured out who that woman is. It's Charlize Theron.
That was my friend and I did. We came out of the theater and we were like, let's get all the comic book people like looking on Twitter and being like, comic book people, help us.
Yeah, but that was the question. Did you know who that was? Clearly, you just answered my question. You don't know who that is.
Yeah, I like when it came out of the theater, like I watched the end credit scene and I was like, okay, that's a person. I was like, that's Charlize Theron. I was like, I know who the actress was. I was like, okay.
So
and then was just like doing some Googling and stuff. But again, it's been like over 6 months, so I was like,
that is technically a variant of Stephen Strange. That's Clea. She is the sorceress supreme of the dark dimension. And here's the part that's interesting. That's Stephen Strange's wife.
Yes. Okay. I remember reading that now because I did a little bit of research. Doesn't she also have a connection to Dormammu in some way?
Yes, because she's in the dimension where he is. So that's the question, like, what's her role in this? Are we going to see Dormammu again? Are we finally going to see the character that everybody thought we were going to see in this last movie, which was Nightmare? Or are we going to see Dr. Voodoo? Like, are we going to see these other big characters? And what's going to happen? I mean, look, here's all I'm going to say. Just make sure that Benedict Wong is in for the third movie, and we're good. We need more Wong.
Great. I was very excited. Like, again, like, we're jumping around a lot, but, like, Wong shows up in She-Hulk, and I was like, that's so fun. Like, I just, like...
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Also in Shang-Chi. I was like, if Wong's here, it's a party. It's a good time. Yeah. I was worried, though, because there was one moment where I was like, oh, no, I don't know. I think, there was a moment in the movie at some point where I was like, oh, no. I was like, don't kill off Wong. Don't kill off Wong.
Yeah.
Him, because he's great. He's just like is the comedic relief, but he also just like he's great. He's my final thoughts on it. I would say like I think Elizabeth Olsen also just did a great job playing the villain
she was great.
Movie. Like I think she did really, really well.
Absolutely.
I think visually, like this movie is really cool. Like I love some of the. I'm not like a big horror fan, but I thought like this movie did like the jump scares really well and some of the creepy crawly stuff. Like I was like, oh, this is like it's really done well. Which again is entirely Sam Raimi and like him having just like such
I think what I really appreciated was the fact that you knew that he directed those 3 Spider-Man films, but I would definitely say that there was a lot of studio talk saying don't do what you do, because you really didn't see that much, especially until you got to scenes with like Green Goblin and later on scenes with Venom. But in this movie, oh my goodness, I think Kevin Feige just said, as long as you keep it family friendly, do what it is that you do the voodoo that you do. And let me just tell you, he did.
Yeah, and so I think like visually it's done really, really well. I want to bring this up really quickly. I don't want to get too much into it, but they bring up the Darkhold in this movie. I'm a fan of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so I'm gonna say I walked out of that and I was like, I don't want to hear anybody say that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't canon because of this movie. I'm not, especially because the 4th season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which has the Darkhold plotline, I think is arguably like the best season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So I was a little bit upset. about that.
Let me say a little something for you as a fan of that show. If they do not bring Clark Gregg back in Secret Wars, there's going to be issues. He
Yeah,
needs to come back in the films at some point. He really
I was
does.
thrilled that he got to do some voiceover work for What If.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't. Secret Invasion is coming out this year. I don't know if that's something he would show up in at
Oh
all.
yeah, that's true. That's
So
true.
that show, like, I'm excited for it, but it also scares me at the same time. Again, as
Yeah.
an Agent of Shield fan, because I'm like, don't. I'm like,
Yeah.
but in terms of, like, again, keeping that show canon, not keeping that show canon, everything else.
Yep.
So I mean, like, the Darkhold showing up, I was a little bit like ambivalent about, because I was like, okay, what do we know about the Darkhold? Because there's other MCU or other Marvel shows besides Agents of Shield that also deal with the Darkhold. I think,
Right.
is it the Runaway? I don't.
I never watched The Runaways, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was The Runaways. I don't know if it was Cloak and Dagger. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it may have been. Yeah, it was. I think
Cloak and Dagger would make more sense if I'm being honest with you. It would make more sense.
Yeah, I think it was. I just know it was one of the ones that was on Freeform at the time, because I remember, like, seeing screenshots of it again, like, around the time.
So, oh boy, here we go. And this is why I'm actually very glad you're here, because I know that you are one of the many people that loved Thor Ragnarok. But now we got Thor Love and Thunder. Taika Waititi comes back, and this is all that I am going to say about that movie. It was a hot mess. Oh my God. I just remembered, I watched it with my wife. We were sitting in this very room. And I'm not going to lie, my wife was literally yelling at me. She said, Steve, will you wake up? Watch the movie. I was literally falling asleep during half the movie.
The best part of this movie is the end credit scene.
Yes.
Because I'm a big Ted Lasso fan. So and I think we may have, like, talked about it briefly, but I'm a big Ted Lasso fan. So when I saw, like, Brett Goldstein show up as
Hercules,
like, I was like, yes. Again, this movie, like, I was like, it was worth sitting through if I got to enjoy just, like, that singular little moment.
I mean, again, this is basically Kevin Feige saying the exact same thing to Taika Waititi that he said to Sam Raimi. Do what it is that you do. Because clearly people loved, at least a large amount of people outside of myself, because I gave my thoughts on Thor Ragnarok on your channel and got a little bit of a ass chewing out of it because of some of the things that I said in regards to my language, and I apologize for that, but that's just me being the fan that I am. I can't fight that. But the fact that he was given free reign in regards to making this follow-up, I did not like anything in this movie. I feel that he relied way too much on the comedy. Now, don't get me wrong. Taika Waititi, I know he has done some work that a lot of people love. I know a lot of people love What We Do in the Shadows. I personally loved his role in Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds. I thought he was funny, over the top and funny. It was a fun movie. But, you know, even though the MCU films do try to make a lot of their films very lighthearted, sometimes they will bring the dark. Captain America Winter Soldier still holds up to this very day because of the direction that it goes into. But Thor is not a joke. Thor is a very serious character, especially because he's based around the Norse mythology. There's so much there. Gore the God Butcher is a character that was introduced a few years back in Thor God of Thunder, issue number 6. And they did even talk about the weapon that he carries in that film, the Necro Sword. But there's so much to that weapon that I knew they weren't going to talk about, because it led to one of the largest Marvel events of 2020. But the point that I'm making here is that I just don't appreciate the fact that you tried to make this movie so lighthearted, so fluffy, and so funny, especially bringing Natalie Portman back to play the Mighty Thor, aka Jane Foster, and seeing what she's going through in the movie and making it so lighthearted. I'm sorry. It's not right to joke about people with cancer. That's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I think so. This is one of my notes that I had down, because I remember a time where I was really, really excited about this movie because my thought was down the line, like we're getting the Loki series and then we're getting Thor Love and Thunder. And my thought is like, you can't have a Thor movie without Loki. So I was like, we're gonna somehow, and he's gonna have the magical. And so I was like, and then once I slowly, as we started to get closer to this release, and it was like Loki's not gonna be in this movie because obviously when you look at how the Loki series ends, it's like there's no way that's not happening. And I like came to terms with that. I still stand by this statement. You can have like a Loki project without Thor, but you can't do Thor without Loki. And I think the reason why I say this is getting to like what you sort of touched on is that tonally Loki is a foil to Thor. So Loki is that very serious sort of like straight man character, and then Thor, like, and this is sort of like, you know, how they do this in Ragnarok. So like Thor is the sort of like comedic character, like they bounce off each other, they're foils to each other. And because Loki isn't in this movie, there's no foil. You have like, you know, Tessa Thompson's Valkyrie, who also sort of is a comedic relief character. You have, you know, Jane, and they do comedic moments with her. You have the Guardians who show up, and it's like there's nobody who is that like serious, straight character for like to like balance that tone out. Because even Gore the God Butcher has some like weird sort of quirky comedic moments,
which is
like,
weird to me.
Sort of
and it's not just that.
In that foil.
But it's not just that. You get an actor like Christian Bale, who I know can play an incredible villain. And I'm just like saying, oh my God, you underused him. You underused him so much. You underused Tessa Thompson. You underused the Guardians. You underused Russell Crowe. This is the opposite of fan service. He basically took everything that you were expecting and said, yeah, you're not going to get any of that. You're just going to get my own little crazy concoction here.
Yeah. And so like the thing with the Guardians too is like they show up in this movie because they need to be in this movie because of what happened in Avengers Endgame.
Exactly.
Put them all together. So it's like they need to be in this movie in order to address that. But it's not like, I think so many people were excited about like, oh my gosh, the Asgardians of the Galaxy, and like you know, the whole idea of that. And then like that doesn't really, you know, there's not much at all. And I think about like Karen Gillian, for example, like, you know, having to get in full hair and makeup and having to do like everything that she does.
Yeah, I love the dedication.
It's like
I love her dedication.
Awful. Yeah, it's like I feel awful that it's like she had to go through the whole hair and makeup process and everything for something that it felt like, you know, they didn't need to be like, they don't really contribute. There's like the one line that that is said at some point in the movie that sort of does set up the story about like it's better to feel suck than to not feel nothing at all. That was a horrible paraphrase of that, but I think like, you know, maybe what I'm getting, like there's one line in there that sort of sets up the plot of the movie a little bit that comes from the Guardians. But otherwise it's like they're not really necessary to this movie other than that we needed to address them being together in Endgame. And I feel like almost my thought on this too is that we've never had a fourth standalone movie for any Marvel character in the
That's
MCU.
correct. That's correct.
And like to say is like we are getting a fourth Captain America movie. We know that's happening, but I don't even want to count that because Sam Wilson is Captain America now, and that's a different person.
if I may say something, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but to a certain degree, we already got Captain America 4, and it was called The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and this is Captain America 5.
Yeah, that's also a fair point too. You could look at it that way too, because I feel like one of my friends, her argument was like Captain America and the Winter Soldier could have easily been a movie rather than a series.
It was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a movie, and Kevin Feige said, no, let's make this a series. Bad idea. Bad idea. This would work so much better as a movie.
Yeah, that was one of my friends' like key arguments about that, is that she was like, that was, oh yeah, it could have been. So, but anyway, again, like point being, I feel like, you know, Chris Evans has his 3 Captain America movies, and now you're getting a new, it's like, it's different, but this is like the first time we've gotten a 4th installment following the same character, the same actor, whatever. And I almost just think like, it didn't feel necessary to me at all. Like it almost would have made more sense to have like a 3rd Guardians movie, because we haven't gotten that yet, and have Thor in it, you know? Like I just felt like 4 movies felt like a lot for this character, and I was like, what are we, especially if we're going to, because of how the movie ends, it's like, how much longer are we going to keep seeing Thor, like keep dragging out, you know, his story and telling it, where it's like, I feel like I almost was like, what is the point? Like, what are
Well, clearly they are already saying that there will be a fifth Thor movie, but Chris
yeah,
Hemsworth actually said, and I saw these, unless these are completely false, he literally said that if we're going to make a fifth Thor movie, Taika Waititi's either going to make a serious movie or get him out of the director's chair because I will not do another one of these movies.
yeah, because I think like Ragnarok was fun, and I think like it was necessary because the first two Thor movies, oh well, not the first two, the Thor: The Dark World, a lot of people hate it and think like it's
I
an awful
like
movie,
it.
and I enjoy it. Yeah, like there's the beginning of it, like it's kind of slow. Like I'm not gonna make the argument that's one of the best Marvel movies ever, but I feel
No.
like it, like I don't despise it the way that other people do. And so it's like I understand from like a Marvel perspective as a business, you're looking at it and being like, okay, the Dark World didn't do very well. A lot of people weren't happy with it. We just need something new, something fresh to shake it up. And Taika Waititi, I think, did a good job in Ragnarok because there is a tonal balance there. I feel like there's serious moment and there is like I feel like there's the balance there, but it felt like that was gone in Love and Thunder, and it did feel like a bit of a like it felt really nonsensical. And also like one of the big issues I had is the movie has like an 80s vibe to it, and that's
Yeah.
supposed to be 80s referential, but then it makes some weirdly like dated jokes. Like the Screaming Goats is like a 2010
Yeah.
thing, and it was like, why is this in here? Like, did they think people were gonna find that funny? Is it to try to make a rep? But it feels like again, like you're referencing 80s culture, so why throw in like a 2010s movie
He
into it? It just feels like jokes for the sake of jokes, and it feels
I
odd to me.
feel that he tried to make Korg one of the driving forces of the film. Now, don't get me wrong, the big parts that he has in Ragnarok are very funny, but
Yeah.
he's not one of those characters that can truly drive a film,
Because the
especially a
story
Thor
is
film.
ultimately told in frame, but like when you like think about it, because Korg is narrating this whole story as if it's already happened. And so that's another thing too, is like with frame stories, you have to remember like it's all dependent on the narrator and how they're choosing to tell the story. So there's also that.
I
Um,
mean, I personally did appreciate a couple of things. Like the one thing I really did appreciate was the fact that we were introduced to some of the other mythological universes that we have. So like it was really, really cool to see Zeus in the film, even though Russell Crowe was completely underused. That of course goes to the post-credit scene. I am so glad that Hercules makes an appearance because
yeah,
Hercules is a fun character. And I'm just like, oh God, I've read some comics where he has gone up against Thor. I have seen comics where he's gone up against the Hulk. And he's also ended up becoming one of the Avengers at one point in time. So I'm really curious to see if they will do something good with him. Because the truth of the matter is, if we see him in this post-credit scene and there is no Thor 5 and we never see Hercules for the rest of the timeline, it's just going to be this will
yeah,
probably end up being one of the very, very few Marvel movies that everyone's going to say you don't need to watch this one because there's no point. And
yeah,
that's sad.
yeah. I think like to talk about some high points to because I don't want to completely bash this movie. I think one of the things I think visually this movie is really stunning. I like the
Yes.
use of color. I think that's done really well. Like the, going from color to black and white and playing with that really well. I think one of the things that was nice about having Taika Waititi as a director is that watching the behind the scenes for Love and Thunder, and I was curious about this, and so I was glad that I got this answer. Um, Star Wars uses, and I think they started using it around the time that The Mandalorian came out, the volume, which is like this big space that allows you to like 3D project images. So it's like you're not just shooting against green screen, you're actually in a more lifelike, immersive set. And I don't know why, I just find it very, very fascinating. I love that that exists. And I think like as an actor, it's so helpful to be, you know, as close to the setting that you're filming in as you can be, because obviously like these are fictional places and stuff, but to just feel like actually immersed in place, I think that's just like fascinating technology. And this movie uses that, which makes sense because Taika worked on The Mandalorian and directed an episode for that, so he had that access and that resource, and so he was finally able to use it for this movie. And I think Marvel should have been using it a long time ago, because I think that that's just a like for them and the type of movies they create, it makes sense to get to use a space like that. So
Look,
I think like the
I
production and like creation, like the shooting of this movie, like visually is like well done and getting to use the volume for that. But yeah,
look, the truth of the matter is, if I was able to see this movie in theaters, I would have because I see all the Marvel movies in theaters. Unfortunately, not anymore due to my current livelihood and circumstances, but that's fine. But I want to make sure that I do watch every Marvel film because I know that there's a piece of the puzzle in here, and I know that it's an important piece. But look, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I'm still, my head is still spinning trying to figure out what's going to happen after Doctor Strange 2, and now I'm saying the exact same thing about Thor: Love and Thunder. I'm like, I don't know where we're going. I know that there are people who are part of this project that want it to end on a high note, and I'm just hoping that we'll get that. That's all that I'm hoping for, because if you really think about it, Chris Hemsworth really did not get a great sign-off at the end of Avengers Endgame. He didn't get the type of send-off that, Robert Downey Jr. got or Chris Evans got. So he's waiting for that send-off. This obviously was not it. And if it was, it would be a darn shame. But clearly, he wants to be remembered for this legacy. And I just hope that Marvel gives it to him if they're going to make a fifth Thor, or if he's going to show up in any of the Avengers films. That's all that I'm going to say about that.
Right. Because he's also been around, like, I think as an actor, like, you have to think about, like, these movies are so demanding, and he's been around for so long. And I sort of say the same thing with Tom Hiddleston as well as Loki. Is like, they've been around since the very beginning, and we're still making projects with them, and they're still around, like, for this whole new chapter. And it's almost like, and a lot of people made this argument, the Loki series would sort of just, like, restarts its plotline. And it's like, it feels like these characters are there because people like them and because they sell them, people are excited about them. But it's like, it feels like we're almost trying, because there is so much, Marvel content out there and easy ways to continue these character stories, but it feels like it's almost forced in a way to try to, like, because again, like, there was so much in Avengers Endgame that had to be wrapped up and dealt with. And it was like, Thor was one of those characters that couldn't really get a proper send-off. So it's like, well, we need to continue to keep doing something with him. And obviously, like, again, looking at the way this movie ends, like, there's still more story there. Obviously, Jane, that's done with, and I'm glad they at least brought her back. So that
I'm happy about that.
And they gave that arc, because I kind of knew going into this movie that, like, her arc was going to be that, because it just sort of a lot of people.
Well, it's from the comics. That's why she has the power. That's directly from the comic books.
Right. And so I knew about that arc, and, like, that didn't surprise me. And I thought, like, I think at least, like, I'm glad that story was there.
Loki wasn't there, but the truth of the matter is, Natalie Portman and Chris Hemsworth did have excellent chemistry in the previous Thor films.
And I think that's one of the high points of this movie is them interacting.
I agree.
It's meant to be is like a rom-com, and so it kind of is like their, story in a way. And I think it is, that's sort of one of the key points.
So, speaking of a whole bunch of stuff being thrown at you, we got a lot of stuff thrown at us thanks to Disney Plus. So, I don't know how much we're going to cover. I know we can't do one by one, because if we do this, we're going to be here for the next 8 hours, and my wife is going to murder me. But I'm just going to basically ask you a rapid fire. What was your favorite show? What was the one that left you really disappointed? And what was your biggest surprise?
Well, I have to say my favorite easily right off the bat was Moon Knight. I think, like, you mentioned this a little bit earlier with, like, them underutilizing with Thor: Love and Thunder, underutilizing some of the actors. I think Oscar Isaac was completely underutilized in the Star Wars movies. And so getting to see him in Marvel now, like, it just, like, what he does in this show is just insane to me. Like, playing both Stephen Grant and Mark Spector, and, like, like, what that takes as an actor to be able to play all these different variations of the one character. I think also the, like, DID portrayal in this show is done really, really well. Obviously, I can't personally speak to it, but I think, like, it's a lot of times in movies, like, where they want, like, one that is something that is portrayed. A lot of those characters are portrayed as villains because there's something weird and sort of scary and off about them having multiple personalities. And this handles it in a way that's really raw and human, especially the one episode that really dives into, like, where that all started and where it's got its root into the trauma that Mark went through as a child, and sort of how he adopted Stephen Grant as an identity. May, like, the entire cast in the show is phenomenal. I love that we introduced May Calloway and sort of her role that she gets.
And Ethan Hawke is the villain. Ethan Hawke is great. I love Ethan Hawke. Great.
And the ending with Jake Lockley, because that's something, like, you were building to and building to and building to, and then, like, actually getting that ending, like, phenomenal. Like, it's so well done. And for the first time, like, it kicked it off on a high note, and then just kind of all
Well,
downhill.
I gotta be honest with you. That was my biggest disappointment because Moon Knight is a character that I've known about for a very long time. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you know this, but Moon Knight's first appearance was in a little comic book called Werewolf by Night.
Interesting. Okay,
So my issue with that was, don't get me wrong, I love Oscar Isaac as an actor. I will always say that my favorite film that he was in was a movie called A Most Violent Year. I recommend that movie. It's him and Jessica Chastain. I recommend that movie to anybody. It is such a great atmospheric slow burn drama. It's brilliant. Highly recommended. But knowing that he was going to play Mark Spector, I thought that that was such perfect casting. My issue with the show was that should have been a movie. I feel that my biggest problem with that movie, with the show was, and once again, I understood where they were going with it. I mean, that's a big piece of Moon Knight's persona, but we didn't get enough of Moon Knight being Moon Knight. I wanted more action. I loved the mythology because, once again, we talked about the Norse mythology. We talked about the Greek mythology. In Moon Knight, we get the Egyptian mythology. So we get a lot of interesting mythologies here. But this is another dive into the dark universe that we still have yet to truly uncover because, again, we talk about the dark universe. We talk about characters like Mephisto and Ghost Rider and Blade. We're talking about a really cool bunch of characters. But I understood what they were going with this, but I really feel that if it was a movie, it probably would have been much better because the same thing for me can be said about Ms. Marvel. The first episode was fantastic. The last episode was fantastic. But then there's that middle piece, and it's just what? What is this? You know what I mean?
I think, I really, one of the reasons why Moon Knight, because I think we talked about this last time, was the first time we introduced a character through an MCU show, because otherwise a new character through an MCU show, because sort of 2021 was a lot of the characters that we already know, like Loki and Bucky, giving them their shows. And so 2022 now was okay, you're meeting a new character for the first time through the show. And I feel like with a movie, because with the show, you get an episode week by week and there's more time to flesh things out. And so obviously you can then make the argument that stuff gets dragged out a little bit. But I think almost the cliffhangers in these episodes, at the end, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And I wanted the next one. And so I felt like I had the most fun watching it week to week in the buildup of everything. And also because it is where is this going? And you have the point where they're in and figuring out what's going on inside Steven's head, what's real. There's the scene where he gets shot and then you're like, is he dead? And they're all in, and then there's the hippopotamus, all of that. I just had fun watching it.
Yeah, there were some really great visuals in this show. I am not going to lie about that.
And I felt in comparison to some of the other MCU shows, it didn't feel like there really was a wasted episode. It feels in comparison to all the other MCU shows, at least I felt all 6 episodes, it felt like we were getting somewhere, and there was cliffhangers at the end, and I felt like I was, that I felt like they used their time really, really well for the 6 episodes. And I think in comparison to some of the other MCU shows, and again, I just think looking at everything else that was released this year, I was like, it has to be the best, because I can't say that for Miss Marvel, which again, I liked, like you said, I loved the first episode, I loved the last episode, but then it's all that stuff in the middle. But I think the highlight of that show is sort of the representation and the getting to see a different culture. I love that we get to sort of see I love the Marvel convention that's in this episode. Show. And I think
that's what the comic does too. The comic really does harp on the identity as well, but that's fine. I mean, that's why Kamala Khan has become such a popular character. I mean, I also understood that there were a lot of people that were upset over the fact that they changed her powers, but that's really not something that we really need to go deep into. But here's another thing that Ms. Marvel did that Moon Knight did not. At least with Ms. Marvel, we knew where we were going. With Moon Knight, I was saying to myself, what exactly is his role in the MCU? Because it really seems like
it's isolated.
Yeah, he is the very much isolated character in this universe. He didn't even know anything about the Avengers.
Yeah, it's which one of the things, I guess, that you bring that up, it is a little bit weird because the show in comparison to some of the others feels very isolated. And obviously you have the cliffhanger ending at the end, so it's we have to are we getting a second season of the Moon Knight show? Is it showing up?
Is he going to show up in a movie?
Yeah, it's like there's no indication. There's nothing, like we don't know what we're building to, which like it said at least for Miss Marvel, you have the like final scene. It's like, okay, we're setting up for the Marvels, which comes out this year. And it's like, you know, at least like what you're building to and what you're setting up to. But almost like that is kind of one of the things weirdly that I liked about Moon Knight is that I could watch
it was just on its own.
I don't have to know if I'm building like the isolate stuff, which we like you brought up Werewolf by Night. I think that was one of the strengths of that movie as well, or like that little short as well, not to get too much into it, but it's like again the Marvel burnout that everyone's experiencing, to be able to watch something isolated and enjoy it and not have to feel like, oh, I need to watch the next thing and build to the next thing. Like it's nice to have something, I think, isolated again, not that build up, and it's like, where are we going, what are we doing? Because I think there's almost
right, and that's the thing, because my favorite thing that Marvel gave us in the MCU, and I gotta be honest with you, I think it's a tie. Werewolf by Night and the Guardians Holiday Special. I loved them both. They were just Werewolf by Night. I honestly had no interest into it, but when I saw that trailer and that they were really trying to pay homage to the classic Universal movie monsters of the 30s and 40s, and then when I saw that movie / special,
so well
I was shocked by how good it was. And I also love that we were introduced to the big monster, which is Man-Thing. I kind of love that Man-Thing made an appearance, but I don't know much about many of these characters. Like, you have to understand that before I read comics, I collected Marvel cards. So I got all the characters and I got the profiles on the back of the cards. So that's how I knew about all these characters and what their real names were and what their powers were. That's why I knew who Moon Knight was. My very first time I ever actually cracked open a Moon Knight comic was a year ago. I'm not kidding. But I knew everything that Moon Knight was about. But all of these characters in Werewolf by Night were just so intriguing. I want more. I want more of this.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think, like, one of the things is, like, I don't know, I walked away from Werewolf by Night, and I was, like, again, I had no intention of watching it, and then I was like, yeah, why not, and I watched it, and I was really, really impressed by it, but I think, like, almost my, like, thing is, like, I finished it, and I wrapped it up, and I was like, this has a nice, cute little ending, and I was like, I watched that, and I enjoyed it, and I can come back to it and watch it again if I want to, but, like, I had no expectation watching it of, like, oh my gosh, is this character going to show up in the MCU again? Is this what we're building to? And I think, like, again, I think that was Marvel's strong point this year, is like putting out stuff like that is one-shot sort of things where it's like, I can watch that, I can enjoy it, and then I don't have to worry about the implications of it anymore. Because I think all of that, and I think is why people are experiencing so much Marvel and MCU burnout, is because it feels like, again, you need to watch and pay attention to everything, and it's nice to just watch something and be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, like, I loved the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. I mean, like, it was just so gosh darn cute. It was like, how do we cheer up Peter? Let's go kidnap Kevin Bacon. I mean, like, the fact that Kevin Bacon has added a little bit more to his 6 Degrees game makes me so happy. But it was, and the best part is the fact that not only is he in the special, he sings with his band. Yeah, I also really appreciate the fact that this was really like the first time that we got to see Mantis really have a very good role in the world. And her and Drax, those two actors, you want to talk about people who play off each other well? Nobody plays off each other well than those two actors. I mean, oh my God, they are just so kooky and so weird and so funny. You can't not be entertained by these people.
Yeah. And I think, like, one of the things that was nice about the Guardians Holiday Special is obviously, like, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is coming out.
And the trailer looks great.
This is in that movie, I know it'll be interesting to sort of see what happens there, because I know James Gunn seems to have plans for that movie, and I think there's gonna be stuff that happens in it. At least that's my.
Well, I just want to see Will Poulter play Adam Warlock. I love Will Poulter.
That's gonna be great. But I think, like, my thought was, like, okay, before that happens, like, this is the first time that we're seeing James Gunn directing the Guardians again since Volume 2. And I think he just knows those characters better than any of the other directors in the MCU that have touched them, like Taika Waititi and
the Russo brothers.
Yeah, and the Russo brothers. And so it's like, I think, you know, as much as people may have their opinions on James Gunn, there was a whole thing that happened, whatever. I think,
I'm glad you mentioned that, by the way, because I feel that, you know, the fact that he even was willing to come back and do that. I mean, first of all, when he actually did go to the DC universe and made the Suicide Squad, that was basically him giving the finger to Marvel before. Because remember, he got onto that project before they brought him back. So he was basically giving the finger to them, saying, this is what Warner Brothers Discovery is letting me do. And now what he is right now, that's a whole other topic for another time. We're not touching that for the 10-foot pole right now. But I'm curious as to what went on in, dare I throw a Broadway moment down here. I really want to know what was in the room when it happened. Like, I want to know how that conversation went with James Gunn and the executives saying, we want you to come back. We want you to direct the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And then the big question is, what did he say and how did they come to this agreement? So let me just say I couldn't be more excited for a Marvel film than Guardians 3.
Yeah, I think like him being back and directing those characters, like there's nobody that does those characters like him. And again, people have thoughts, like the Guardians movie isn't even one of my favorites. I like the second more than the first one. And the Guardians aren't even my favorite Marvel characters, but I think like where all the Guardians make their appearances and every time that they show up, I think like when he is in control of them, they're at their best because it's just fun. Again, like he did, when you look at the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special and then you look at Thor, Love and Thunder, which both have these sort of comedic tones to them, I think the holiday special does that comedy better. In terms of just like being fun and being unsuccessful, but also there's like the heart there and like it being Christmas and it's fun. And I think like it's nice almost again that can exist. And I don't think you need to have watched that to go and see Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Like it's just a fun holiday special. And it's like, I think that should be Marvel's strength is doing more one-shot things like that, where it's something fun to watch. It can pacify you and it doesn't have to be like, where are we building up to, what is the next big thing? It's just nice to watch it and enjoy it without feeling like, what are the implications for everything in the MCU going forward? Because again, there is so much stuff that they're building towards and it's hard to know what's going where in what direction. It's just not as streamlined.
So my biggest surprise, and this is probably going to be something that is going to get many, many smacks over the head. I kind of love She-Hulk Attorney at Law.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we discussed that.
Bad, it was hilarious. Like I went into that show with my expectations were in the seventh circle of hell when I turned on episode 1, and I laughed throughout the entire first episode, and I laughed throughout the entire second episode, and I kept laughing and laughing and laughing, saying, this is so darn stupid, but oh my God, I am having too much fun. That last episode, oh my Lord. You know something? The fact that another company didn't have to have Disney make fun of itself, the fact that Disney did it themselves, made me kind of applaud them for being that gutsy.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that I like about She-Hulk is the fact that it knows what its MO is. Like it is very self-aware and it knows like everything it does feels so intentional. Like the big thing like I think about this show that I think is super interesting is they teased Daredevil's cameo like from the very beginning. And so you're like expecting like Daredevil, and you're waiting for it. And then it finally comes at the end. And it's really like they have that one big fight scene, which is, I feel like that felt like that was necessary. But they basically use him as a one-night stand. And I feel like there's a lot of people who like, I remember seeing people on Twitter who were like so frustrated about that. But it's like, again, that show, like it knows what it's doing. It's like, this is She-Hulk's show, not Daredevil's show. I know a lot of you may be watching this for that Daredevil cameo that is eventually coming, but we're going to have a one-off wedding episode. We're going to just like take as much time as possible until we actually get to that point. And then when we do, it's going to be on our terms and we're going to do it our way. And it just feels like, again, this show, it knows its identity. It knows what it is. And again, it's very self-aware. And I love that. And I think they did a good job with using that character, which in the comics is self-aware, and taking that and bringing that to the screen.
I also have to say that I was actually one of the very few people that actually was not upset about Daredevil's costume, because a lot of people do not know that is actually the way his costume looked when he was first introduced in the 1970s.
Yeah.
The yellow is there. I wish that he would have had the big red D on his chest. That would have just been the real icing on the cake, because that's the one thing even going back to the Netflix show, which is so wonderful, he has to have that 2D insignia somewhere on his costume. I don't like that they're trying to avoid that, you know? I kind of don't like the fact that he doesn't have that.
Yeah.
But it was really nice to get Charlie Cox back, of course. And, you know, the truth of the matter is, I think that this was a great opportunity to show just how funny Charlie Cox can be, because he has some really great comedic gems in that episode.
Yeah, he's wonderful. I adore him to pieces. And I think like I've watched the Daredevil show since I think the last time we talked, I hadn't watched it yet, but I think I watched it in the beginning of 2022.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I watched like that was what I did in the beginning of January. I think I watched the first 2 seasons, but I haven't watched the 3rd season because that gets into the Defenders and everything that happens there, and then like all of the other shows. So I kind of got to a stalling point where I was like,
so that means you've gotten to see Daredevil, you've gotten to see Kingpin, you've gotten to see Elektra, and you've gotten to see the Punisher too.
Yeah, so like the first 2 seasons, great. I also went and watched the Punisher show on its own, which is so good.
Yeah, John Bernthal is a great actor. He's a great character actor. I've seen him in so many things, and every single time, I mean, I will definitely say one of the biggest surprises for me was when he played Lee Iacocca in Ford versus Ferrari. I was so surprised by his acting performance in that film.
Yeah, he's great. And I really want them, because especially they're talking now, again, not to get too off track, but like bringing back a handful of the Netflix, you know, Marvel characters.
I want them back. I want them back. I want them in Daredevil Born Again. I mean, what really upsets me is because of what She-Hulk was, now everybody is so skeptical about what Daredevil Born Again is going to be. But I really, really don't think that Kevin Feige is, pardon my French, I don't think he's going to be that kind of a bastard and ruin it for everybody.
No,
I just don't
think a lot
think
of people are very, very excited. Like, again, like a lot of people were really excited when Daredevil showed up in Spider-Man No Way Home. That was another great part about that movie. Like, that was something that, like, I think people were kind of into it. Like, that was a moment I had like big excitement about in the theater. And so I think, like, again, him showing up in She-Hulk was like, again, they're both like, it made sense for him to make that cameo. But again, it's like them using the character on their terms. And when he gets his own show, it'll be on his terms, and it'll be Daredevil the way that we all know Daredevil, because I think like they're not going to mess it up, especially because it feels like they've ordered, from what I remember, like double, if not triple. Isn't there like 18 episodes?
I believe it's 19 episodes.
Yeah, which is insane because most of the Marvel shows only have 6. So
yeah.
Or I think like She-Hulk had a little bit more, but like they haven't. That's so the fact they've ordered that many episodes, like I feel like they're going to be doing a lot of stuff there.
The only thing that I definitely have to say about She-Hulk Attorney-at-Law is that I want more of Ginger Gonzaga in anything, because she was so funny. I laughed so hard. I like Tatiana Maslany as Jennifer Walters. I thought that she was a great idea. I mean, yeah, I know the show was definitely under budget, so the effect looked a little bit weird, but you know something? I appreciated the fact that we really got the She-Hulk of that everybody loves in the comics. The one that we got in some of the Avengers books that were done before Rainbow Rowell took over the comic, which she is currently writing, she at least brought She-Hulk back to the original form that people like. Nobody liked this big, beefed up woman on steroids that actually looked like Bruce Banner as the Hulk. Everybody got turned off by that because, you know, there's really nothing else I really need to say about that, but people like the way that she looks. People like the fact that she got her usual costume. And I mean, the only thing that I was a little upset about was the fact that we did get the Wrecking Crew. He was one of the guys ended up in the Abomination's little self-help villa, so to speak, because the Wrecking Crew are a Hulk group of villains, and they look much better than the way they looked in this show. But it was nice to see them, because the one thing that made me very excited about this show was that, are we finally going to get some more of the Hulk mythos? Like, are we finally going to see the leader show up? And is Tim Blake Nelson going to reprise his role from the Edward Norton film? Now that we have Scar, you know, does that mean we're finally going to get this fabled Planet Hulk movie that so many people are excited about? Will we see? Because that's the thing. One of the interesting things is, if you take a look at superheroes or superheroines in comics, you can definitely point out a certain hero and you can immediately name that person's rogues gallery. But not that many people know a great deal, because like everybody knows who the Hulk is, but nobody knows his enemies. So it's like nobody
he
knows
never really
much.
got his due service
Because
in the MCU. He kind of just had to show up everywhere else. And so
it was a licensing issue.
Yeah, and so I definitely thought it was interesting, like how much homage like this movie paid, not only to like the Edward Norton Hulk movie, like again with Tim Roth showing up as the Abomination again.
Yes,
like,
so great to get him back.
Yeah, you still see him in Shang-Chi for the first time, obviously, and then he shows up in She-Hulk. But it's like interesting to see that character make an appearance. Because I remember when Shang-Chi came out, like not a lot of people because again, a lot of people like who joined and watched the MCU were like, you can pass on the Edward Norton Hulk movie. Like nobody, you don't really.
I disagree. That is such a good movie. Edward Norton, Liv Tyler, Tim Roth, the late. Oh shoot, I just missed his name. Not John Hurt. God, the other Hurt, William Hurt. Hurt. Yes.
Who they've now recasted, by the way, not to get too far.
Oh no, I heard. Just saying, oh dear God, Harrison, please stay alive. For the love of God, stay alive.
Yeah. But I think like it's interesting because again, I feel like that was the sort of like back then when you're like a lot of people were getting into the MCU for the first time and it was like, what movies do you need to watch to build up for Endgame, everything else. And I feel like a lot of people were like, you know, they recasted Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk, so they don't really need to, and they weren't really making a lot of references to that movie. And now it's like they've brought in the Abomination, and it feels like even there was the one episode where they made the nod to Lou Ferrigno and like his spin as the Hulk. I like caught on that, and I was like, that's really fun. And it feels like they're getting you're getting more of the Hulk.
If you're going to go in that with that attitude, then you basically tell people you shouldn't watch the first Iron Man because Don Cheadle's not Rhodey. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. But I know like that was something that a lot of people said, and like I remember hearing, you know, a lot on Twitter when I like started watching the MCU movies and everything. And I did watch it. And again, it's not one of my favorite movies. I think like, you know, it is very, very early MCU, but so the MCU was still figuring out its comedy and everything else. And I think like it just made so much sense to recast Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk and everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love Edward Norton. I really, really do. Though now that I've seen Glass Onion, I'm saying he could have totally done what Mark Ruffalo did because he does have some great comedic chops.
Yeah, but I like watched Glass Onion too, and I was actually really surprised. And I think like again that was Marvel in its like early phases and not really knowing.
It's also just because of the licensing. It really was the licensing with Universal that made it really difficult. But I will still say it's better than the Eric Bana film from 2003. This is a very good film. It's one of the darker Marvel films. It has an amazing end action sequence, but I see where people are coming from. I do, but I just feel that, you know, She-Hulk basically was a meta show, and that's basically what it tried to be. And love it or hate it, that's what it is, because that's what the original intentions were. And I think my favorite part about it was in the last episode when she basically goes, and what the heck are you going to get the X-Men in these things? You know, like I kind of love that they did that because they've been leading to it. I
love like that scene where the Disney Plus menu shows up and she like breaks through, because I remember like watching that for the first time and I was like, what
is going on here?
Like I was like my TV, like I was like and I was like, whoa. Like I just remember sitting there and I was like, I need to take a moment to process. Even like Kevin and making the joke with like Kevin Feige and Kevin being the robot, and they even gave him like a hat, like with the way that they designed it. So it looked like
it was clever.
Very, very funny.
It was clever. I kind of thought it was funny. It was campy. I liked the camp. The camp worked.
Yes, and I think like a lot of people I know like walking away from it, like it was kind of frustrating because it's like you're about to get this big fight sequence. It's supposed to be like, you know, very stereotypical Marvel, and then they're like, no, we're gonna deny you and give you a whole bunch of self-aware content. And it's like, again, the show knows what it's doing and it's not gonna play into all the stereotypical Marvel tropes because it's aware of all of those things, and instead it's going to sort of make fun of them. And
but again, it's the reoccurring theme that we pretty much got since the beginning of our discussion. Once again, this show has wrapped up. I'm pretty sure it's not getting a second season. What's going to happen to She-Hulk? Where is she going to end up? What's the end game here? I hate to pull that word out of my butt right now, but it's true. What's the end game that's going to lead us to Secret Wars? You know, we don't know because
it feels like we're introducing characters and it's not very clear where it's all going. But I know like the big thing that I felt like this series ended with was like the Hulk has a kid now. Like he gets introduced, and I was like, okay, that's interesting.
Well, it's from the comics, so Scar is a character, so it doesn't matter. But it's the question is, you know, are we also going to finally get a series of Hulk movies, which Mark Ruffalo definitely deserves? I think he does deserve it. He's another one of those people that really didn't get go off on a high note, but it's also because of the fact that he's still playing a crucial role because he had that scene in the post credits of Shang-Chi. He's obviously shown up in She-Hulk, so there's still room for his character, much like Thor. And I just hope that it's good and it works. But the final installment to Phase 4. And I just got to say, I am so grateful that I got the opportunity to go see Black Panther: Wakanda Forever in theaters. I'm just gonna say it, no filters. I fucking loved this movie. I loved it.
It was great. It was very, very good. I remember being nervous about this movie at the time that
I
it was
know.
filming because there was stuff with like the teacher, right? And she got injured at one point, so they mentioned having to delay the movie. There was issues with like her COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
So again, we don't have to get into it. But I do just remember being very nervous, especially because with Chadwick Boseman passing away, it was like, okay, how are they going to handle this? What is the story going to be now? Because it's like, how do they, how do they tell this story? Where do we sort of go? And I think for one, this movie pays a beautiful homage.
Beautifully done. Beautifully done. Yeah, but I will say, I think the reason why, and also getting Ryan Coogler back to direct, great.
Yeah,
but I really think that the reason why this movie was a movie as good as it was is because this movie did something that many, many Marvel films have struggled with. They gave us a very strong antagonist. Namor the Submariner showing up finally, because if you don't know the history of Namor, he was one of the first creations of Marvel Comics. When he was made back in 1938, Marvel Comics wasn't even called Marvel Comics. Stan Lee was not even in charge. So the fact that it took us such a long time to see this character, now granted, they did do a little bit of a fiddling with his origins, not necessarily his origin story, but in the comics, he is the king of Atlantis. That is something that we have to always say. But considering the fact that we have a king of Atlantis in Aquaman in the DC universe, do we really need to make a second king of Atlantis? I'm not going to say that it had to be exactly like that. I mean, I feel that the choice that they made in regards to the kingdom that he rules made a lot of sense, because Namor is not necessarily a villain in this film. He's more of a nemesis to Wakanda and an anti-hero. Because he's not a bad person. He has his own intentions. You understand where he's coming from. But because of the fact that he poses a threat to the hero/protagonist of this film, he's looked at as the enemy. And I think because of the fact that he is written as an anti-hero or as just a nemesis of Wakanda, that's why he's such a strong character in this film.
Yeah. And I think, oh my gosh, the actor who plays him, Tanak, just does such a good job. I was so impressed the entire time.
I want more.
And I was glad, like, again, like, because they got to a point where at the end of this movie, I was like, they're not going to kill him off yet. I was like, we still have way more to do with him. But I was definitely.
Oh my God. Oh God, the things that we have to do with him. I don't know if you know this, but one of the main reasons why I was so excited to know that he was coming into the MCU is because, this is only opening up more doors for Fantastic Four. Because I don't know if you know the history, but oh my God, Namor tries to steal Sue from Reed Richards all the time. He is madly in love with the Invisible Woman, and he always tries to show her that Reed is not your love. He is uncool. Be with me, the King of Atlantis. Like, I want Reed Richards and Namor to butt heads. I really, really do.
A fun time.
I think so.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to see more from him. But I think, like, this movie, like, I took a whole class my first semester of college that was centered around Black Panther. Like, the title of the class was, I think, it was like post-colonialism in Black Panther. And so, like, Black Panther was kind of like our through line in the college class, and we read a whole bunch of post-colonial literature and had a lot of discussions about Black Panther as a post-colonial text. And so there is a lot of, like, I think the Black Panther movie, like the first one of the things it does so well is that there is so much you can take away from it, and like you can watch
also great, it's because
not
it's such
even
rich
as a Marvel movie, but watch it for like what the conversation and like the the like historical context and like what what it says. And this movie obviously takes Black Panther and makes it more of an MCU movie because we're setting up Ironheart with this show, which like you get
Correct.
to meet her character.
We're setting up
I think
Thunderbolts because Valentina shows up.
yes. And so some of that felt like it was, thrown into this movie a little bit, and maybe it wasn't entirely needed, but it was there because Marvel needed it. And so that's kind of, I think, one of the movie's maybe weak points, because it's kind of to add, you're adding plot elements to it.
Right.
That don't need to be there. I'm excited for Ironheart because as a local Chicagoan, I'm excited for an MCU
I
show.
hope it's good. I'll watch it. I'll watch that. I'll watch Armor Wars. I'm gonna watch them. I'm hoping that they're good.
But I think
I know that Phoebe Williams is not really a big fan favorite in the comics. A lot of people don't like her. So I'm just hoping that the show, if anything, or the special or whatever it's going to be, will at least try and do something that the overall movie-going / TV watching public will appreciate. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I think, so like, there's obviously all of that feels very Marvel centric, but this movie's strong suit is like everything that's not that. Like, I think this movie's strong suit is like telling, just Wakanda and like their whole history, the way that they navigate, and just like their, like, the way the interactions between all of those characters. I think like from, beginning to end, I think one of my favorite moments of the whole movie is, and I knew that they were going to do this, like I wasn't surprised when it happened, but the credits for Chadwick Boseman,
right?
Because they did that for Stan Lee as well. But I don't think Stan Lee's, when they did that, because I think it was in Captain Marvel.
Correct.
Yeah, that they did those credits, but I don't think it was completely silent. Like I think
no, I am so glad you said that, because I was having that conversation with my wife. It makes more sense to have the music when they were doing the tribute to Stan Lee, because that theme song is Stan Lee. It is Marvel. To do this, it's also because the fact that Stan Lee was 93 years old. I mean, come on.
And so it's not as whereas like
it wasn't sudden.
Like it was more sudden, and so this obviously feels like we're really going to take a moment of like silence, a moment to pause, a moment to really honor him, and then you have the whole funeral. Like it is, like all of that. And then I think like one of the scenes I have to really, really, really shout out, because I know a lot of people have been shouting it out, is that throne room scene. Angela Bassett. Oh my goodness.
Do you think she should be nominated for an Oscar?
Yeah. I was like, give her
I mean, like,
I don't think she's gonna win.
No,
but the Golden Globe, like, and I mean, I just something.
No, sure. Like, her performance, Angela Bassett's performance. Angela Bassett's performance in this film was definitely one of the best performances that I took away from this movie. Also, I also will definitely say one of the highlights of that movie is Winston Duke. I love him as M'Baka. He is, because see, what I really liked about this film was that this was the Marvel movie that I've been waiting for such a long time. It was the serious, dark Marvel film. And every time there was, and it wasn't comedy-centric, it was very dramatic, very atmospheric. Also, a lot of people say that they really feel like it feels a little bit more closed in because you don't see the grand cities. But apparently, that was the biggest mistake that the first Black Panther had, because they spent so much of their budget to show you what Wakanda looked like. The third act action sequence, the final showdown between T'Challa and Killmonger, is terrible. So because of the fact that we don't see vast landscapes of Wakanda or even of Namor's kingdom, those action sequences, those fights are beautifully crafted. Yeah. They're flawless.
They're so well done. I think like you brought up Killmonger.
Okay, that was a big. I was like, wait a minute. What is he doing? What is Michael B. Jordan doing in this movie? Holy cow! But it made so much sense.
Theorized that he was going to come back, but obviously I was like, how are they going to do it? And I thought it was super interesting, because I think like one of the things this movie does, like that I think is really different from Marvel and what they normally do, is that I feel like with Shuri's character arc, because I feel like she is sort of the central character of the story, because obviously she ends up taking the Black Panther mantle. I feel like the traditional expectation for the character arc would be like she's struggling with her grief, and so like is obviously going into her science and her AI, and is really just like, throwing her grief into her technology. And so I think the very stereotypical arc would be like she doesn't know how to deal with her grief, obviously with losing her brother and feeling maybe partially guilty, responsible for not being able to, cure him, heal him with that whole like synthetic heart-shaped herb. And then, what happens to her mother happens, and then that'll happen. She's thrown further into grief. I think like the traditional situation would be like, okay, she learns how to deal with her grief and then takes the heart-shaped herb and has it. But so I think it's almost interesting that Marvel doesn't do that. And it's like that when she's really on her revenge and her war path, they have her become the Black Panther. And so that's why she ends up seeing Killmonger instead of her mother, because it's sort of showing that she's on a similar like war path. Like she's not so like her intentions aren't so different from him. And I think that's just interesting to set her up in that way as the Black Panther in comparison, because obviously like I think one of the things this movie like really like I kind of was the moment where I realized it, like Chadwick Boseman as the Black Panther, like he's a character that's so regal,
iconic.
It is pure of heart and is just so good. And to have Letitia Wright's Black Panther in contrast to that be someone who's on a bit of a more of a revenge path and a war path and kind of is,
I mean,
what she's doing purely out of spite a little bit. And obviously then she comes to sort of learn and realize, but it's sort of after we have this whole big fight sequence and it happens sort of close at the end as she starts to sort of deal with
I mean, did you also notice that when she puts on the Black Panther helmet, she chooses the Killmonger helmet?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting. No, but the thing is, as great as Chadwick Boseman is as Black Panther, you know, one of the few things that I could definitely say what this movie got so right was the fact that we got to know the secondary characters that even though they were in the first film, they really didn't get the character development. We got so much more from Letitia Wright, from Angela Bassett, from Winston Duke, from Lupita Nyong'o, even Martin Freeman as Roth. We got so much more to their characters. And I mean, like, it's sad because of the circumstances that led us to this point, but I'm really glad that we got to know some of these characters because and of course I completely forgot Denai Guerrera. I mean, as Okoye again, so great to see her back, and like I love the fact that she was also some of the comic relief because the best part about her is the fact that she says everything with the darkest, straightest face, and that's what makes her comedy so wonderful.
She's great. Like that whole scene where they're picking up Riri Williams and the comedy there, I was like, she is wonderful.
She's perfect.
Then you have like that scene, but then you have the scene in the throne room where she's playing off of Angela Bassett, and it's like she's a necessary part of that scene too. Obviously, Angela Bassett shines and like steals the scene.
Absolutely.
But like you need someone to be able to play off of, and like Denai Guerrera does a wonderful job there. And I think like again, like this entire cast like really, really shines. I love I love also we get like to our ending and we get to meet baby T'Challa, which was something I was like not expecting, but that felt like again like a very to to Chadwick Boseman and everything. And Lupita Nyong'o and her role, like once you find out like, you know, she's a mother and like what she's been doing off in Haiti and everything else, like it sort of makes her plotline and her arc sort of make sense because she seems like she's handling her grief maybe better than some of the other characters. And you know, obviously know why.
This was the movie that really caps off Phase 4, but this is also one of those movies where so much is left up in the air, but the difference between this movie and all of the other MCU stuff that we got in this half of Phase 4, and the truth of the matter is, I can even go all the way back to the beginning of Phase 4 with Black Widow. It's like, this is the journey you want to go on. This is the path you want to take. You want to know what's coming next. What's going on in Wakanda? What's going on with Namor? Like, what's going to happen in regards to this? Because I had only heard rumors, and this may end up in a different Marvel film, but the whole story with Vibranium, there was supposed to be a scene somewhere, whether it was in this movie, in a post-credit scene, or in a future movie, where someone is going to say, we don't need Vibranium anymore. We found something stronger, and it's supposed to be adamantium, Wolverine's claws. So I'm just like, because that's one of the few things, because this movie does it too. There are 3 points in the second half of Phase 4 that link to the mutants. Because yes, Namor is a mutant. And I like the fact that through him and through Ms. Marvel and through Doctor Strange with Professor X coming back, the X-Men are coming. We just don't know when, and we just don't know how. But what I can definitely say is that before we get into our overall thoughts about Phase 4, let me just say that I am excited for Phase 5. I am very excited for Ant-Man Quantumania, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, because the funny thing was, when we found out when that movie was coming out, my wife actually said to me, oh, is that President's Weekend it's coming out? I said, yeah, just around. I said, well, maybe we can send our daughter off to daycare and we can go see it, because she loves Paul Rudd. She wants to see it, but look, For me, right now, just I'm excited to see what's going to happen with Kang, and I'm just like, give me the Fantastic Four. I just want the
Yeah.
Fantastic Four right now because you want to talk about true. I mean, they are called Marvel's first family for a reason, and I believe that we're really going to start leading up to it. But the problem with Phase 4 was I feel that we got quantity over quality. And Feige has said we want to reverse that, which is why we're only getting at this point in time 3 Disney Plus events when it comes to MCU. And we're going to be getting, I think, only 3 films this coming year. I mean, I know it's Quantumania, and then it's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and then there's the third movie that I am still trying to figure out. Because, I mean, like, when I saw that laundry list of stuff that they were making, I mean, I was going to mention this to you when we were talking Doctor Strange, but do you really want to see the House of Harkness? I mean, like, why are we getting that?
Yeah. I think like because again like the Agatha All Along song, that song trended and it did really really well, so it's like, oh, people want it, like again it's like they're looking at what people are having conversations about and then just creating spin-offs and content based off of that. And I think the cast for it is gonna be fun. Like obviously I'm gonna watch it, but like I think I agree with you to an extent that I think like the biggest issue with Phase 4 is that it left us with more questions than answers. And it feels like we're doing a lot of building and building and building to not really get to like, we're building the foundation for all of these things that we're doing for like the next 10 years of Marvel. And so it's kind of just like, I think almost being patient and kind of trusting the process because like obviously you can't compare Phase 4 of Marvel to Phase 1 of Marvel, but it's sort of, I think in a sense is that it's like we're building a foundation to something. And I think Phase 5 is going to be off to a better start. Like I'm excited for Ant-Man Quantumania. I'm excited for Secret Invasion. A little bit nervous about it, but I am excited about it. I'm excited for Loki season 2, obviously.
Right.
I think it's no surprise to anyone who knows me. And then obviously the Marvels is coming out, I believe, as well next year.
Right, that was the third one. I wasn't sure about which one was coming next.
Yeah,
You're right. It's Marvels. It's the Marvels.
Yeah, and so then I think, and then there's Guardians Volume 3. So it's like I think there's some good stuff down the line that's like to be excited about. But I think yeah, Phase 4, it just felt like, and I think COVID probably could have played a role in that too. I think that's a big elephant in the room because a lot of these releases were supposed to come out in 2020 and sort of trying to get back on track with things. It feels like 2021 and 2022 was like all of this stuff that sort of they've been sitting on that was like on the back burner because of COVID and having to move release schedules around. And so I feel like that probably also played a part in things too, is like having all the stuff that they sat on that like they didn't have that extra year.
Right, exactly. Well, look, I still, my expectations are high just because of the fact that I am a fan of these characters. I am a fan of this lore. I mean, I'm really excited. I mean, personally, if I was going to basically give you my favorite film of Phase 4, it really is The Eternals, just because it is just unlike all those other movies. And also knowing that there are characters like Hercules on the way, and Clea, and the Black Knight, and Blade. Like, there are so many characters that are on the way that get me more excited. And once again, I just hope that they play their cards right. They really do hold to the whole quality over quantity aspect, and they give us a little bit. I just hope that the paths bottleneck and then go into a straight path unify. That's all that I want, because I just feel like it's a little bit messy right now. And like you said, a lot more questions than answers. But I just hope that Kevin Feige rights the ship, because the truth of the matter is, I don't know what James Gunn is going to do with the DCEU, but I definitely know that he is gunning, pardon my pun there, for the MCU. And the truth of the matter is, Kevin Feige saying that it's going to be quality over quantity shows us that he is still trying to make sure that the MCU does stay on top for Phase 5 and Phase 6. And I am very excited to see how Kang is going to play this role as the next big baddie, because I know that he's a big link to the Fantastic Four as well. But again, I'm just excited to see Doctor Doom. I'm really wondering who they're going to cast. And, Secret Wars, I mean, right now, if nobody's excited for an MCU movie, at least you had Enter the Spider-Verse Volume 2 to watch in a couple of months. But maybe we'll finally get Miles Morales. Who knows?
Yeah, I feel like there's so much on the pipeline and things that like surprises and stuff that's in store that's like I'm, excited for everything that Marvel has planned. And I think Phase 5, like I said, is going to be off to a better start.
Let's hope.
Yeah, I think like Phase 4, and I think Phase 4, like again, there was a lot of stuff that came out again. Like I was really a big fan of Moon Knight, which really surprised me because I wasn't expecting to be a big fan of it. I think the Spider-Man, like, you know, Spider-Man No Way Home, I think obviously is like, I think a standout from Phase 4 because that's like what we did. And then Wakanda Forever, like I think those are like, you know, the big three in terms of that. Obviously, like I'm also a fan of the Loki series, but that's sort of just me. And I don't think that's even one of the best, but I obviously am excited for season 2 of Loki, especially knowing that some of the team for Moon Knight worked on the like second season of Loki. That makes me very hyped and excited. So like again, I think with every Marvel release, there's good and bad things. There's releases that are average. There's some that are better than others. But I think Marvel does superhero stories better than anybody else. And obviously, like I mean, who knows what's going on with the DCU? That could turn around, and then maybe there's like some shocks and surprises. But I think for the longest time, Marvel has done superheroes unlike anybody else, and they've sort of been like, you know, what everybody else is trying to mimic. And so I think Marvel, especially because, you know, there's so much going on in the room where it happens that we don't know about yet.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of just trusting the process and sort of see how everything unfolds. But definitely, yeah, more questions than answers at this point, which is kind of frustrating. But we'll get answers soon.
We will, because I'm just hoping that Gabby will be returning at the end of 2023 to discuss some more MCU stuff. It'll be great to have back over here on That's Comical. This was a great conversation. I was really glad that we really picked up where we left off. We didn't skip a beat, and that is just awesome. So I think that this is the best place to officially wrap it all up and put a nice little bow on it. So everybody out there, I hope you're excited for just going back to the movies and seeing these big spectacle films. And like we both said, I just hope that we really do get what we feel that the MCU has been lacking for just a little bit, and hopefully we'll get back on track and, you know, another Endgame quality conclusion to another story arc would be wonderful, but we'll see what happens. Right? Yeah. So take care, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.